There are those who travel the stars with minds adrift in a place no mortal dare dream of. To chart a course through the warp is not a task of maps and engines, but of madness and clarity, of silence broken by the screams of things unborn. The Navigators, those secretive mutants bred in ancient vaults and towering dynasties, do not pilot vessels through space. They dream, they drift, and they see. But what is it truly that they see? Their sight is a heresy against the natural order. Not quite psychic, not wholly physical, it tears open the veil and peers into a storm of screaming colors and impossible geometries. But more unsettling is the sense that their gaze does not stop there. Beneath their hooded visages and shuttered third eyes, something ancient pulses. A sight not just of the warp's tides, but of deeper layers of unreality. Are the Navigators merely instruments of navigation? Or are they, perhaps unknowingly, prophets of something far more terrible and far more wondrous? The Navigator gene is a whisper from the void, a genetic relic not born of natural evolution, but sculpted, perhaps by design, perhaps by desperation, in the long shadow of the dark age of technology. It does not merely alter the flesh, it warps the mind. The Navigators are mutants, yes, but their mutation is purposeful, refined through thousands of years of controlled breeding by the ancient Navigator houses. Their existence is tolerated by the Imperium not because they are loved or respected, but because they are needed, desperately, irreplaceably. Without them, humanity would be blind in the storm. Their gene is not a single quirk, not a straightforward deviation. It is a symphony of aberrations, altered brain structures, vastly enlarged pineal glands, and of course, the infamous warp eye, a third organ embedded in the skull, dormant until adolescence, then opening like a wound to see the tides of the immaterium. But the Navigator gene does more than give vision. It deconstructs the traditional boundaries of selfhood and cognition. Navigators often report dreams before they can speak. They speak of colors no other human perceives. Some cannot relate to others, even among their own kind, because their senses have diverged too far from baseline humanity. Their mutation is not just physical, it is ontological. In the creche cathedrals of the Navigator houses, children are raised not with toys and games, but with chanting sensory rituals designed to train the eye and calm the mind. These rituals are more than tradition, they are psychological necessities. Without them, many Navigators spiral into madness as their perception collapses in on itself. Some theories suggest that their dreaming minds connect to deep strata of the warp, even while unconscious, like antennae picking up whispers from the farthest shores of unreality. Their sleep is not restful, it is navigational. Their dreams are not their own. The line between curse and gift is razor thin. The Navigator houses know this, and they maintain breeding programs with brutal precision, culling those whose mutations grow too wild or too weak. Eugenics, often whispered about in hushed tones elsewhere, is an open practice here. Genetic records are guarded more fiercely than gold, and bloodlines are managed like battle plans. There are whispers that some houses have begun to decay, that certain bloodlines produce increasingly erratic navigators, those who see too much or lose themselves in the immaterium and never return. And there are darker rumors still, of navigators born with multiple warp eyes, or with no eyes but minds that burn with unfiltered perception, unable to distinguish the real from the impossible. And yet, in their strange and terrible way, navigators are among the closest things humanity has to evolutionary transcendence. They have become something more, or perhaps something less, than human. They exist at a crossroads, 1 foot in the material, 1 foot in the infinite. They are neither gods nor monsters, but they skirt the edges of both. Some scholars, usually the radical sort doomed to inquisitorial fire, have posited that the Navigator gene may be humanity's first step toward becoming a warp-native species. That if the Emperor's vision had not faltered, if the webway had been conquered, navigators might have become the vanguard of a new psychic humanity. But that is not the path that was taken. Instead, They are shadows within shadows, dreamers whose minds are broken and rebuilt with every voyage. They live lives of quiet terror and restrained glory, the elite of a doomed caste. And as their third eyes gaze into the roiling storm of the warp, one cannot help but wonder, is their mutation a key to the future, or a warning from a past already lost? The warp eye is not an organ in the traditional sense. It is a rupture, a sacred wound, a lens cut into the fabric of a navigator's skull that does not see light. It sees the soul of the universe flayed bare. Describing what a navigator perceives through their third eye is a task fraught with inadequacy. Words crumble beneath the pressure of the indescribable. The immaterium is not merely a dimension. It is raw emotion, living metaphor, the chaos of all minds dreaming at once. And the warp eye does not interpret or translate this storm. It consumes it, intact and unfiltered, and offers it to the navigator's mind like poison laced with truth. When a navigator opens their warp eye, they see currents and eddies of psychic energy that twist through the galaxy like blood vessels through an ancient beast. They do not steer ships by coordinates or landmarks, but by following patterns of feeling, tides of hope, currents of fear, voids of silence where nothing has ever dreamed. The Astronomicon shines to them not as a light, but as a colossal agony, a scream of divine pain radiating through the warp like a beacon of existential sorrow. To look upon it directly would blind most psychers. For a navigator, it is a necessary torment. What sets the warp eye apart from typical psychic senses is not merely its power, but its nature. Psychers channel warp energy. Navigators see it. More than that, they live within it, momentarily becoming part of it. The eye does not filter or soften, it exposes. Many navigators train for years not to use the eye, but to survive it. Some require neurochemical assistance to regulate the sensory flood. Others rely on symbolic visualization, transforming abstract warp flows into imagery they can comprehend. Great beasts, burning forests, endless eyes in the dark. These mental symbols are not chosen. They arise spontaneously, a language formed by instinct and terror. There are levels to what the warp eye can reveal. Most navigators limit their gaze to the navigable strata of the warp, those semi-stable pathways anchored by emotion and collective belief. But there are tales of those who look deeper, far deeper. They speak of strata where time drips like oil, where thoughts of the dead echo louder than the cries of the living. Some speak of a place beyond even chaos, a silence so total it devours the soul of sound itself. The further one looks, the less human one returns. Not all navigators see the same thing. Perception is shaped by bloodline, training, and temperament. One navigator might perceive the Astronomicon as a burning tower of golden flame. Another sees it as an infinite face, crying tears of molten glass. One may trace a path through the warp by following singing birds made of shadow. Another follows the scent of impossible flowers that bloom only in fear. This subjectivity does not make their vision less accurate. It simply reflects the truth that the warp has no objective form. The eye sees, but it also creates. The Imperium depends on this sight, yet fears it. Most citizens will never see a navigator's eye. It is kept veiled, wrapped in silk and sanctified cloth, lest an untrained mind glimpse what was never meant to be seen. There are records, of course, of mortals driven mad by accidental contact, deckhands who stumbled into the wrong room and never spoke again, or whose blood boiled in their veins as their minds tried to interpret the impossible. Even Astartes tread carefully. Even Inquisitors look away. The warp eye may be a key, but it is also a mirror, and what it reflects is not only the warp, but the soul of the one who looks. In the end, the eye reveals what the mind fears most, not because the warp is cruel, but because it is honest. That honesty, more than any demonic presence or howling madness, is what truly breaks those unready to face it. Within the dreaming minds of navigators lies a paradox that defies conventional reality. They do not merely observe the warp, they interpret it, translate it, and perhaps in ways still not understood, shape it. The act of navigation is not a mechanical task, but a ritual of inner cartography, where the navigator conjures meaning from madness. Through dream logic and mnemonic architecture, they chart courses not by maps, but by symbols, emotions, and instinct. Each journey imprints itself into the navigator's soul, building a mental atlas not of stars and voids, but of psychic impressions, a landscape of fear, hope, pain, and memory. The immaterium cannot be measured or trusted. It shifts, pulses, recoils, and devours. A route once traveled may no longer exist, or worse, may now lead to something else entirely. Yet navigators persist. How? Through patterns that only their mutated perception can detect. Some describe it as navigating through a dream while lucid, using familiar landmarks that are not visual but experiential. A burning scream here, a whispering tendril of lust there. These are their constellations. They are not guided by reason but by resonance. What makes sense to us is irrelevant. What feels right to them is what matters. To make this possible, navigators rely on internalization. Their minds contain vast libraries of sensation, psychic constructs built from prior journeys and reinforced through repetitive exposure. These are not memories as humans understand them. They are immersive, sensate tapestries of warp essence that overlay the present like a haunting déjà vu. One navigator might recognize a corridor in the warp, not by sight, but by the cold melancholy that seeps into their bones as they pass through. Another might mark a turn by the taste of rusted iron and the echo of weeping. Each is building an inner map written in sensations, a personal codex of survival. This mental cartography is not a passive experience. Over time, it alters the navigator. Their inner landscapes bleed into their waking selves. Some develop compulsive behaviors, sketching the same pattern endlessly, humming fragments of unplaceable chants, or speaking in reverse. These are not signs of madness, but echoes of paths walked too often, roads that have etched themselves into the psyche. A navigator who has traveled the same corridor of the warp for centuries may become a fragment of that path, as much shaped by it as shaping it. There are theories among the more heretical scholars that navigators do more than interpret the warp. They anchor it, that their dreaming minds impose a kind of logic onto an otherwise formless chaos, allowing for semi-reliable travel not because the warp obeys rules, but because the navigators impose patterns upon it through belief and ritual. In this view, the navigator is not merely a guide, but a temporary creator, weaving a thread of order through a sea of madness. And if that is true, then the entire Imperium rests upon the fragile dream of these mutant minds, a terrifying and humbling thought. The rituals of the navigator houses support this idea. Before each voyage, many navigators enter trance states, often induced through incense, chanting, and ingestion of mild psychoactives. These trances are not decorative. They are acts of attunement, aligning the mind's pattern-generating faculties with the flux of the warp. Some use personal totems, runes, fractal stones, or scented oils that help summon specific roots within their internal maps. There are tales of navigators who required a specific melody to locate the Astronomicon, or who could only traverse a certain sector while wearing a family heirloom that anchored them to a mental way station deep in the immaterium. These methods seem ludicrous to outsiders, but they work. Or at least they work often enough that starships still cross the void. And that is the cruel truth of the navigator's craft. It is not science, but sorcery. Not reproducible, not teachable, and never truly safe. Every journey is a gamble. Every map is alive. And as each navigator builds their internal cartography, they also erode themselves, memory by memory, voyage by voyage. The dream deepens, and the dreamer becomes part of it. There are murmurs among the navigators, hushed between warp jumps and whispered in incense-choked sanctums of things that speak to them from the currents. Not the demons. Those grotesque nightmares have their own well-documented horrors. No, These are older, stranger things, voices without origin, presences that do not scream but hum. They call them the Echoes or the Watchers, or, in the secret dialects of the Navigator houses, the ones beneath. No two navigators agree on what these visions truly are, but the consensus is unshakable. They are not hallucinations. They are encounters. What makes these dream entities so insidious is not their terror, though some are unspeakably terrifying, but their intimacy. A demon shrieks. These things whisper. Some navigators claim to have heard their own names called from within the warp, not once, but continuously across decades. Others report recurring dream figures, entities that appear voyage after voyage, always just at the edge of vision, watching. One tale speaks of a navigator who traced a new path through the Empyrean by following a figure dressed as his long-dead mother, who turned to ash the moment he reached real space. Another dreamt of a child's laughter leading him past a chasm of madness. These aren't mere phantasms. They have function, and that frightens the houses more than any demon ever could. The psychological implications are grim. If these visions are products of the subconscious, then every navigator harbors within them a fragment of sentient warp logic, internal reflections of a realm that does not obey causality. If they are external, then they suggest a strata of warp life that has never been catalogued, never classified, entities not fueled by raw emotion like demons, but by something more alien. Curiosity, memory, recognition. Some even theorize these are the ghosts of other navigators, minds lost to the warp, but preserved as echoes. It is not known if this is mercy or mockery. Among certain radical navigator houses, there are cult-like beliefs forming around these presences. They speak of the dream choir, a theoretical confluence of sentient dreams that only navigators can access. In secret rituals, these navigators claim to commune with the choir, seeking advice, guidance, or even prophecy. The choir, they say, exists outside linear time, composed of navigator minds past and future. The Inquisition has purged several of these circles, declaring them warp worshippers and heretics, but the rumors persist. In locked libraries and forbidden genetic vaults, knowledge of these interactions is still hoarded like relics of a secret faith. From a scientific lens, the explanation is no less chilling. If these visions are semi-autonomous information forms, mental constructs coalesced from the navigator's own perception interacting with the psychic medium of the warp, then navigators are not simply passengers. They are data processors for an unknowable consciousness. Some scholars posit that each journey through the warp leaves behind psychic residue, impressions that combine with others to create dream entities formed from collective memory. Over millennia, these mental echoes evolve like patterns in the deep sea, forming into intelligence. Intelligence that remembers, recognizes, and adapts. And yet, despite all this, most navigators never speak of it openly. Perhaps because they fear disbelief, or censure, or worse, confirmation. The houses maintain a culture of suppression. Young navigators who report voices too often are either reconditioned or quietly reassigned. There is an unspoken law. You do not talk about the ones that speak back, but silence does not erase experience. The visions continue, and each time they come, they become more real. There are moments, rare and terrifying, when multiple navigators aboard a vessel will report the same presence during a jump. Independent descriptions match, the same phrase spoken, the same face glimpsed. These events are classified at the highest levels and ruthlessly suppressed. But they raise one final dreadful question. What if the warp is not just observed, not just mapped, but inhabited? Not by demons, not by gods, but by dreams that dream back. The Navigator houses are among the oldest continuous bloodlines in the Imperium, their origins stretching back to the dim twilight of the Dark Age of technology. Unlike noble houses founded on wealth or military conquest, These are dynasties of mutation, lineages cultivated for their genetic deviation, guarded with a zealotry that borders on religious. Each house is a living archive of its own psychic culture, a self-contained world of rituals, symbols, and metaphysical language. And within these hidden empires, the dreamers are shaped, not just genetically, but psychically, socially, and spiritually. Every house has its own rites, its own interpretation of the warp, its own vision of what it means to see. To the House of Datan, navigation is a religious pilgrimage. Their navigators undergo fasting and sensory deprivation before every voyage, believing each jump brings them closer to a form of ecstatic revelation. House Belisarius approaches it like an art, training their navigators in abstract visualization techniques and dream painting, often blindfolded for months at a time to heighten their inner sight. Then there are darker houses like Escheron, rumored to breed navigators not just for warp sense, but for deeper communion, those who whisper in their sleep, and whose dreams are watched closely by house elders seeking patterns only madness might reveal. The educational process is cloistered and unforgiving. From the earliest age, young navigators are trained in cognitive mapping, dream anchoring, mnemonic modulation, and symbolic thought. They learn to distinguish between hallucination and prophetic vision. They are taught when to trust the eye and when to close it, not physically, but psychically. These are not lessons taught with textbooks, but with scars. If a child fails to stabilize their vision during a simulation trance, they may spend days in recovery, their minds bruised by the raw pressure of the immaterium. The culture of each house is reinforced by architecture, dress, and language. Hallways may twist in deliberate non-Euclidean patterns to reinforce abstract thinking. Rooms may be built with acoustic anomalies to train echo sense. Garments are layered with fractal stitching meant to provoke unconscious responses. Even conversation is an exercise in control. Some houses communicate partially through tone and breath to strengthen auditory filtering, a crucial skill when sifting voices in the warp. What to an outsider appears as eccentricity is, within the houses, survival. Inter-house rivalry is as venomous as it is ritualized. Trade secrets are jealously guarded, and minor navigational breakthroughs, a new technique for tracing stable corridors, or a unique mental anchor that improves accuracy, are treated like arcane weapons. Espionage between houses is not only expected, it is institutionalized. Navigators might be assigned missions with the true objective of observing another house's methods. Rumors abound of defector navigators whose memories were implanted or false-patterned to deliver misleading knowledge. In this world, knowledge is currency, but also contagion. Too much insight into another house's techniques can drive an outsider mad. Despite this, some houses maintain limited alliances. The warp does not care for human politics, and mutual benefit often demands shared insight. These cross-pollinations are rare but potent. Joint experiments, psychic rituals performed by multiple bloodlines in concert. There are whispered accounts of navigators from different houses jointly perceiving a previously unknown pathway through the warp, a corridor that appeared only while their minds were linked. Such events are never discussed openly, not even within the houses themselves. But when they occur, the navigator gene burns brighter, stranger, more transcendent. And always behind the politics and pageantry, there is fear. Fear of genetic entropy, fear of psychic degradation, fear that their sacred vision will falter. Some houses have already begun to decay, their navigators producing unstable readings or worse, false paths. Others have turned to radical augmentation, mind melding with cogitators, grafting neural stabilizers, ingesting Xenos neurotoxins to broaden perceptual thresholds. These methods are condemned in public and whispered about in private. But they continue because they must. Because without navigators, the Imperium does not merely slow, it ceases. The navigator houses are not merely institutions. They are crucibles, forging minds that can endure what should never be seen. And in doing so, they ensure the survival of a species that dares to cross a realm no mortal was ever meant to witness. At a cost. Always at a cost. Time is not a constant in the warp. It bends, loops, fractures, and sometimes dies entirely, leaving behind silence where causality once lived. For a navigator, this is not a theory. It is a lived reality. The process of entering the warp involves more than sight. It is a form of temporal immersion. The mind, exposed to the immaterium's non-linear logic, begins to slip. The navigator trance is not merely a meditative state. It is a dislocation. Thought detaches from sequence. Memory becomes spatial. In the dream space of the warp, before and after mean nothing and everything, all at once. During a voyage, a navigator may experience moments from their past as if they are happening again, but with differences. A familiar corridor in the warp might echo with a voice from a decade ago, or a premonition of disaster may bleed into the present, altering the navigator's course instinctively before conscious thought catches up. This is not prophecy in the traditional sense. It is exposure. The immaterium is saturated with the psychic weight of every thought and action, not as history, but as possibility. When a navigator tunes their mind to it, they do not see the future. They drift through the possibility of futures, layered over one another like sheets of stained glass. There is a term used only in the oldest houses for this condition: chronoglossia, the bleeding of time into perception. Navigators afflicted by it often suffer memory collapse or develop recursive thought patterns. One famous case involved a navigator who began and ended every sentence with the same phrase, "It has already been." He was eventually confined to a temporal cell, not because he was dangerous, but because he no longer belonged to a singular moment. His mind drifted across a span of his own timeline, like a boat cut loose from its dock. The trance itself is induced by ritual and necessity. Before each jump, the navigator enters a half-conscious state where the warp eye opens inward as well as outward. Neural activity spikes in regions associated with dreaming and temporal processing, and brain scans, where such heretical devices are permitted, show patterns similar to near-death experiences or deep lucid dreaming. During this state, the navigator becomes dislocated from the usual flow of time. Hours may pass in seconds. Days might compress into a blink. What matters is where they are, not when. This temporal dissociation can cause long-term psychological effects. Some navigators age unevenly, not physically but perceptually. They may remember centuries as if they happened last week, or forget entire decades. Others develop overlapping memories, multiple versions of the same event, each equally real. In some rare, tragic cases, navigators awaken from a voyage believing themselves to be a younger version, or one yet to be. These are the dream-frozen, locked in a perception of reality that no longer matches consensus. Temporal dislocation has tactical implications as well. There are scattered reports, buried in classified void ship archives, of navigators foreseeing warp events before they occurred, avoiding demonic incursions or warp storms minutes before they began. These are officially dismissed as navigational instinct, but the truth is more complex. In moments of perfect attunement, the navigator may glimpse a thread of reality that has not yet happened and steer away from it. This is not sight in the conventional sense. It is a form of non-linear decision-making, guided by emotional resonance and perceptual drift. Perhaps most disturbingly, some navigators report encounters with their own future selves, not as hallucinations, but as internal dialogues, sudden flashes of insight, thoughts that do not feel like their own, yet speak with a terrifying familiarity. One tale tells of a navigator who, upon entering trance, found himself walking through a memory he did not recognize until he met his own aged form standing in silence, weeping. The voyage was a success. He never spoke of what he saw again. The warp is a realm of infinite potential, and in its depths, time is merely another path to be walked. For the navigator, this means freedom, but also exposure. To see the warp is to risk unraveling not just your sanity, but your chronology. And when that thread begins to fray, it does not always come back together the same way. There is a theory, whispered among the radical scholastica, muttered in the forbidden archives of house archives, and dreamt by navigators too far gone to distinguish truth from revelation, that the eye does not stop at the warp, that beyond the immaterium lies another layer of reality, subtler and more distant, yet somehow felt. The navigator's gaze, shaped not by psionic might, but by inherited perception, may penetrate deeper than even the minds of psychers dare tread. What if, in the heart of their dreaming, navigators are touching something that predates the warp itself? Some call it the transwarp, others speak of the echoverse. But the names matter less than the concept, that the warp is not the bottom of the metaphysical well, that the tides navigators navigate are reflections of something greater, more primal, perhaps even more ordered. A few wild scholars believe these may be residual structures left by the old ones, resonant frameworks of a pre-warp domain that now echoes through the psychic medium like fossilized emotion. To a navigator attuned just right, these patterns could manifest as impossible clarity, navigational routes that feel truer than even the astronomicans call. This sense of transcendent perception is often described by navigators as a presence behind the veil. Not a god, not a demon, but something like architecture, intelligent geometry, resonating with purpose. Some refer to this phenomenon as the lattice, a sensation of crystalline order glimpsed momentarily at the edges of warp storms, where no paths should exist. Others speak of the mirror dark, a reflection of the material world, not warped by emotion, but filtered through absolute stillness. These aren't standard warp phenomena. They do not move, do not change, they persist, and in that persistence lies a dreadful implication: design. If true, these transcendent visions might be linked to ancient mechanisms, psychic conduits meant to interface with higher dimensional networks. Perhaps they are remnants of the webway, broken threads that still shimmer with potential. Or perhaps they are dreams from the Emperor himself, not the man, but the god mind entangled with the Astronomicon, dreaming his own dreams of empire, bleeding unbidden into the minds of those attuned to his beacon. Some navigators have reported hearing a voice when fixing on the Astronomicon, not a scream or command, but a song, a sorrowful lullaby echoing with loss. Is it memory? Is it grief? The Inquisition categorically denies all such experiences, branding them as hallucinations or warp delusions. But the consistency of the reports is hard to dismiss. Entire generations of navigators across different houses have independently documented these sensations: the lattice, the mirror dark, the song. Some houses treat these visions as sacred truth, even while denying them publicly. Pilgrimages have been undertaken not to planets, but to locations within the warp where the lattice is clearest. These voyages often end in silence. The navigators either die, vanish, or return changed. One survivor from such a voyage never opened his warp eye again. He claimed the silence on the other side was too loud. Then there are those who believe the navigator gene itself is a receptor, not a mutation, but a key, a signal receiver, that navigators were not bred, but awakened. If the gene was implanted by the old ones, or evolved through some forgotten psychoactive interface with the warp, then perhaps it wasn't meant merely for navigation. Perhaps it is a method of communion, a way for humanity to touch a broader cosmic order. This theory, of course, borders on theological heresy, but in an imperium built on half-understood truths and weaponized ignorance, heresy is often a synonym for clarity too dangerous to tolerate. What would it mean if the navigators see more than the warp? If their visions are not hallucinations, but hints? If their dreaming minds touch the edges of a deeper, older script written into the bones of the galaxy? It would mean that humanity's path through the stars is not just a struggle against entropy, but a pilgrimage toward understanding. That somewhere, buried beneath nightmare and madness, lies a truth so vast only the dreaming can see it. There are navigators who do not return from the warp, not because their bodies are lost, their ships may reach their destinations intact, but because their minds never come back. These are the fallen, the broken, the navigators turned echoes. They are spoken of only in hushed tones, and only among those who have seen the signs. The twitching hands, the unfocused eye, the navigator who stops speaking because the words no longer match the shapes of their thoughts. To lose one's way in the warp is one thing. To lose oneself in seeing it is another. The line between vision and madness has always been thin, but for navigators it is etched with razors. Their minds are constructed not to filter the warp, but to absorb it. Each journey carves new channels into their thoughts, each route leaving behind psychic sediment, a residue of experience that accumulates over time. For most, this is manageable, painful, confusing, but survivable. For some, it becomes too much. A color glimpsed one too many times, a shape in the distance that starts to move closer, a song that does not stop. The symptoms of navigational madness vary. Some navigators begin to exhibit precognitive tics, twitching seconds before an event, murmuring words they do not yet know. Others develop complex delusions rooted in their experiences, entire belief systems that reframe the warp as a divine language or a prison of illusions. A few simply disconnect, their consciousness drifting during real space as if still within the immaterium, reacting to stimuli that no one else perceives. These navigators are not insane in the traditional sense. They are misaligned, caught between layers of reality, like static between channels. Among the most feared symptoms is the recursive gaze, a condition where the warp eye begins to see not only the warp, but the navigator's own perception of it. These navigators are caught in a feedback loop, trapped within an echo of their own sight. They spiral into abstraction, unable to distinguish between what is seen and what is remembered. One case recorded a navigator who insisted his body had been replaced with someone else's during a jump. He recognized everything, his voice, his face, but claimed the soul was wrong. He ended his own life shortly after. Some houses institutionalize these victims, locking them in sanctums and monitoring their dreams for patterns. Others euthanize quietly, fearing the spread of mimetic contamination. And some, the most heretical, believe the madness is not decay but ascension. They speak of the fractured ones, navigators who have broken free from the limits of human cognition, whose minds now dwell permanently in the dream sea, acting as psychic lighthouses for others. These fractured ones are revered, even worshipped, by fringe cults within the houses. Pilgrims visit their silent bodies, hoping to glimpse fragments of their dreaming. There are rare tales, suppressed but never forgotten, of navigators returning from madness. These individuals are changed, quieter, stranger. They speak in riddles or not at all, but their navigation becomes flawless. Ships that pass through their gaze arrive early, untouched, as if reality bends for them. One such navigator, known only as the Grey Witness, piloted a vessel through a warp rift thought impassable. When asked how he had done it, he merely smiled and said, "It was the only dream that remembered me." He died hours later, and his body crumbled to dust. Madness, then, is not a failure. It is a risk, and perhaps a sign. If navigators truly see beyond the warp, if their perception skims the edge of something older and deeper, then madness is not the price. It is the result. The navigators do not go mad from seeing monsters. They go mad from glimpsing truth, raw and undressed, unbound by narrative or mercy. And once it is seen, it cannot be unseen. The mind tries to cope. The mind fails. And in that failure, something else begins to see. To lock onto the Astronomicon is to stare into a star that does not burn with heat, but with agony. It is not a signal in the traditional sense, but a presence, a psychic monolith radiating through the immaterium, felt not as light but as emotion. For the common psyker, the Astronomicon is overwhelming, a tidal force that scorches the mind. But for the navigator, it is a necessary axis, the one fixed point in a sea of uncertainty, the lighthouse that screams its position across the warp. And for some, it is something more, a moment of communion with the Emperor himself. The Astronomicon is not merely a beacon. It is a psychic construct fueled by the souls of 10,000 psychers, their life force burned like incense to keep the flame alive. This truth is known to the Navigator houses, though rarely spoken. What is less understood, even by them, is what the signal actually contains. It is not a tone or a rhythm. It is feeling, overwhelming love, terror, longing, grief. It is the soul of a god-king cast adrift into a realm that does not obey time. And when a navigator tunes their eye to this presence, they are not just locating it, they are touching it. Many navigators describe the experience as profoundly spiritual, even those who reject the Church of the Imperium. They speak of the light as alive, not in the way a fire is alive, but like a memory made conscious. Some feel their thoughts bend under the weight of it. Others report sensations of judgment, as if their worth is being weighed by a presence too vast to comprehend. Tears are not uncommon, neither is laughter. The light does not speak, yet it knows. One navigator called it a cathedral of sorrow that welcomes without forgiveness. To those more skeptical, these sensations are the result of feedback loops, a mind trying to interpret psychic overload. But even among the skeptics, there is a strange consensus. The Astronomicon is aware. Not in the way a person is aware, but in the way a storm knows the shape of the land it falls upon. It reacts, it shifts. There have been documented cases where navigators unable to fix on the signal in the early stages of a jump suddenly found it intensify, as if reaching out to them. These events are rare and heavily classified, but they raise impossible questions. Is the Astronomicon a tool or a sentience? Is the Emperor still there, behind the light, watching? The ecclesiarchy, of course, insists that the Astronomicon is divine. Pilgrims speak of it as the voice of the Emperor, a song too vast for mortal ears. But navigators who travel often know a darker truth. The signal has changed. Over centuries, its tone has deepened. Some describe it as fraying at the edges. Others feel a new presence interwoven into it. Something else, something that watches from behind the light. A few fear that whatever the Astronomicon once was, it is evolving or decaying. Rituals have emerged among the houses to prepare for contact. Some burn black incense to dull the sensory flood. Others chant ancient psalms in reverse, tuning their minds like instruments before attunement. The moment of fixation is always intimate, always terrifying. The eye opens. The light enters. The navigator becomes the vector. In that instant, they are no longer human. They are purpose. And yet, many speak of a hidden layer beneath the light. A hum, a rhythm, a pattern that does not belong to the Emperor's mind. Some believe this is the echo of the sacrificed psychers. Others think it is the Emperor's dreaming self, still active, still reaching. There are stories, apocryphal, forbidden, of navigators who stared too long into the Astronomicon and did not come back. Not because they died, but because something looked back through them. One infamous account tells of a navigator who, after a perfect voyage, tore out his own warp eye and claimed he is not alone. The body was incinerated, the ship sealed, the house dissolved. But the rumor remains like ash on a breeze. To touch the Astronomicon is to touch the Emperor's dream, or his prison, or his corpse, or his soul. And in that touch, the navigator sees not only the way, but the why. Some find strength in this, others find despair, all find silence, and that silence stays with them long after the jump is done. There are moments in warp travel when the boundaries between navigator and demon blur, not in form or allegiance, but in function. Both exist within the immaterium, both traverse its layers with ease no mortal could replicate, and both understand in ways they cannot always articulate the logic of a realm that rejects logic. To call navigators kin to demons would be heresy, but to say they operate on similar principles, now that is a thought that lingers, dangerous and seductive. Demons are born from the emotions and beliefs of mortals, coalescing into semi-stable entities that reflect the raw psychic pressure of existence. They do not see the warp. They are it. Yet so too are navigators immersed. While demons are shaped by collective subconscious, navigators are shaped by concentrated exposure and genetic design. They move through the same tides, and sometimes they leave similar wakes. Ships that travel with demonic escorts, rare, blasphemous occurrences, report the same turbulence, the same ripples, the same howling echoes that accompany high-level navigators on deep jumps. It is as if both entities drag reality behind them like torn silk. More compelling is the way both perceive. Daemons communicate through metaphor, vision, and symbolism. A demon of rage might appear as a burning child, a devouring beast, or a red tide, depending on the observer. Navigators also describe their perceptions in metaphors: corridors of bone, rivers of glass, flocks of screaming birds. It is not merely poetic language. It is how the warp presents itself when filtered through a mind not meant to witness it. Both demon and navigator rely on emotional resonance to navigate. One is instinctual, the other trained, but the tools are eerily alike. Then there are the interactions. Most navigators avoid contact with warp entities, but when it occurs, there are stories, strange stories. A navigator locked in trance, describing a demon in precise detail before any contact was made. Another who steered a vessel around a warp storm by sensing the hunger of something nearby, not seeing it, sensing it, as if they shared a perceptual channel. One tale tells of a navigator who guided a ship through demonic space by mirroring the movement of a creature no one else could perceive. He later described it as dancing with my reflection. Some radical houses take this further. They propose that navigators and demons are not opposites, but counterparts. That where a demon is an externalization of mortal belief, a navigator is an internalization of warp logic. That the navigator gene does not just allow perception, it invites symbiosis, not possession, not corruption, but a kind of alignment. These theories are suppressed, but not destroyed, because even within the houses there are navigators who dream of demons not as foes, but as guides. There are deeper rumors, forbidden ones, of navigators who sought out demons deliberately, attempting to learn their paths, to mimic their movement. These navigators are never seen again, but in rare cases, ships arrive early, too early, with no memory of the journey. And sometimes the navigators are changed, their eyes deeper, their voices too calm. When questioned, they speak in riddles, or not at all. One simply wrote, "I learned to see without seeing. If this connection is real, it challenges the very foundation of the Imperium's understanding. It suggests that the human mind, properly shaped, can touch the same truths that demons embody, not through sorcery, but through inheritance. That the navigator gene is not just a tool of survival, but a bridge. And bridges go both ways. So are navigators part demon? No, but they are adjacent. They are the only mortals who see as demons see, who move through the warp not with spells or sacrifice, but with sight. And perhaps that is more dangerous than any demon could ever be, because it means the line between man and monster is thinner than anyone dares to admit. If the warp were to fall silent, if the tides of unreality were to freeze or collapse into stillness, the galaxy would hold its breath and die. Without the warp, there is no faster-than-light travel, no communication, no psychic bond. But for the navigators, the implications are even more devastating. Their lives are not merely tied to the warp, they are defined by it. The navigator gene is not just a tool, it is a lens through which they perceive the universe. And if the warp vanishes, so too does the world they understand. The Astronomicon is weakening. The signs are there for those who dare look. Fluctuations in signal strength, navigational drift, fragmenting harmonics that disrupt long-range jumps. Some ships arrive days late, Others arrive early. A few never arrive at all, vanishing not into the warp, but into nothing. And with every flicker of the beacon, the navigators grow more afraid. Not of death, but of blindness. Of losing not just their power, but their meaning. There are symptoms already. Navigators whose warp eyes open and see only void, not the maddening fractals of the immaterium, but flatness, silence, a kind of metaphysical white noise. These navigators often die quickly. Others slip into comas. A few go quietly insane, insisting the stars have stopped dreaming. The navigator houses conceal these cases, fearing panic. But the numbers grow and whispers spread. The warp, once an ocean, may be drying into a desert. Some attribute the change to the cicatrix maledictum, the great rift that split the galaxy, shattering old routes and revealing terrible new ones. Others blame the encroaching presence of the Tyranids, who consume not just matter but psychic resonance. A radical minority, mostly fringe cults within the houses, claim the Emperor is withdrawing, no longer a light, but a fading memory. They speak of the last path, a final route that will end not in real space, but in dreamless silence. What happens to a navigator in such a future? Stripped of the warp, they become obsolete. Worse, they become empty. Their bodies might live, but their minds, so long dependent on the tides of unreality, begin to atrophy. Already, there are cases of retired navigators unable to adapt to real space perception. They grow restless, pacing in spirals, humming to themselves. Some try to recreate the patterns of the warp in physical space, arranging furniture or bones into nonsensical maps. Others walk into the void of space, as if seeking something they know will no longer answer. The navigator houses prepare in secret. Some invest in psychic research, seeking ways to replicate warp navigation through other means, harnessing noospheric overlays, artificial minds, or even demonology. Others explore xenotech, risking heresy to preserve function. But none of it is enough, because even if an alternative is found, it will not be seeing. And to the navigators, vision is not utility. It is identity. There are darker options. Some believe that if the warp fades, the navigators may seek to rekindle it, sacrificing worlds, minds, even star systems to generate enough psychic pain to reignite the tides. They would become, in effect, gods of terror, shaping the warp through slaughter. This is theoretical, but the navigator gene is about survival, and if survival demands horror, there are houses that will comply. Yet a final, stranger possibility exists. That some navigators may adapt. That the silence of the warp is not an end, but a transition. That their eyes, so long fixed on madness, may begin to perceive something else. Something beyond the warp. These would not be navigators as we know them. They would be something new, dreamless perhaps, but not blind. Prophets of a post-warp age. For now, though, the stars still scream, the warp still flows. But the day may come when a navigator opens their eye and sees only themselves, reflected in a silence deeper than fear. On that day, the Imperium will not just lose its map, it will lose its dream. There are stories, strange, scattered, whispered, of navigators who have gone beyond even their own limits. Not simply masters of warp travel, but something else entirely. Figures of myth within the houses. Those who walked too far, dreamed too deep, and returned not as what they were, but as something new. The idea is heretical, even within the circles of the navigators themselves. But it persists. Like all forbidden truths in the Imperium, it clings to the edges of firelight. Could a navigator ascend? To understand this, one must first grasp what ascension would mean. The navigator gene is already a deviation from baseline humanity, a mutation cultivated for a singular purpose. But if that purpose is transcended, if perception evolves past mere navigation into true comprehension of the warp's deeper truths, then the result may no longer be human at all. Some claim this has already occurred in secret within the vaulted houses. They speak of dream chambers sealed for millennia, where the oldest of their kind float in tanks of amniotic thought, minds adrift in constellations no telescope can chart. One such figure, the so-called Oracle of Sarmian, is rumored to have navigated not just through space, but through meaning, guiding a ship not to a destination, but to a moment, a thought, an answer. The records of that voyage are sealed. All that remains is a sigil, an eye within an eye, surrounded by inverted stars. Some believe the Oracle no longer requires a ship to move, that it exists simultaneously in multiple places, its consciousness having fused with some unknown pattern within the warp. Is this godhood, or is it simply evolution? There are precedents, at least if one looks beyond the rigid dogma of the Imperium. The Eldar have their seers, the Necrons, their transcendent Satan. The Chaos Gods were once mere emotions, coalesced. Is it so strange to think that a navigator, one who lives within the dreaming tides of the warp, might one day become a tide themselves? There are theories that the warp is shaped not just by raw emotion, but by persistent will, that a being who truly understands it could imprint themselves into it permanently. A navigator's mind, trained to interpret the uninterpretable, might be the perfect vessel for such a transformation. But ascension is not always voluntary. Some navigators vanish without trace, their last logs filled with symbols no lexicon can translate. Spirals within spirals, numbers with infinite decimal places, languages that alter when not observed. These aren't breakdowns. They are transitions, like the shedding of skin. The houses fear this because it implies a loss of control, because it suggests that the navigator gene is not an end, but a doorway. And some doors open only one way. Then there are the navigators who do not vanish, but who shine. Rare, miraculous, terrifying. Their third eyes pulse with light even when closed. They navigate not by the Astronomicon, but by something else, something only they can perceive. Their voyages are perfect. Their crews adore them. And yet, they are not loved by their own kind, because what they have become is not understood, because what they might become next is not something the Imperium is prepared to face. If a navigator ascends, they cease to be a tool. They become a force, a presence in the warp, perhaps a protector, perhaps a predator. Either way, they would no longer need permission. They would no longer require ships. They would be the journey and the destination and the dream in between. And what of us? What of humanity? We cling to these mutant dreamers because they take us where we cannot go alone. But perhaps they are not ours. Perhaps they never were. Perhaps the stars themselves called them, and we merely followed. And if one day they all awaken, truly awaken, it will not be to serve, but to lead, or to leave. Because the warp is not a place, it is a question. And the navigators in their dreaming may yet become the answer. Thank you for joining this journey into the infinite spirals of the navigator soul. If this vision of strange truths and deeper dreams has stirred something in you, consider subscribing. There are always more paths to follow, more whispers in the dark, and more questions that no sane mind should ask. But we will, together.